Over 3 years in the making, it is hard to believe that tonight we are going to premiere the Palisades Project film. Hello everyone, thank you for being here. My name is Peggy DePasquale, and I serve as the Associate Director for the Wyoming Wilderness Association. And in that role, I co-produced the film that we are all here to watch tonight. This is a film that explores how over the last several decades, a love for motorized and mechanized recreation has created a wave of opposition to the protections of the 1964 Wilderness Act. It's also a film that aims to inspire a solution for a landscape commonly called the Palisades. Now, I have had a lot of help along the way in the creation of this film. In fact, the origins of this story took root almost a year before I even joined Wyoming Wilderness Association. With a filmmaker that some of you know, Hillary Byrne behind the lens, we were making a film about why the Palisades Wilderness Study Area should be designated as wilderness. In March of 2018, I joined the team and I inherited this project. I also inherited the responsibility to advocate for wilderness in the Wyoming Public Lands Initiative at its very conclusion. That 3-year process had many repercussions, but what was most notable to me was the divide it created in this community regarding wilderness protections for the Palisades Wilderness Study Area. So I pumped the brakes on making a one-side wilderness advocacy film. There is a time and a place for that story, but I didn't feel that this was it. For several months, the project sat dormant, and I spent some time recovering from the Wyoming Public Lands Initiative, which I still describe as my conservation boot camp. But as time passed, I realized that there was a film regarding the Palisades that was worth making. As luck would have it, right around the same time, I was introduced to Emmy Award-winning filmmaker Peter Palafian, who was enjoying retired life at the time. And when I learned of his background, I said, well, I'm making a film. I would love to talk to you more. When I pitched the story, he graciously took me under his wing. He believed in the story we're telling tonight, and I cannot imagine where the project would be without his coaching and support that gave this project all of the momentum it needed to catch its second wind. In January of 2020, it became clear that a filmmaker, though, who was actually looking for a job was needed to join the team. And luckily, Wyoming Wilderness Association had just wrapped up another film project called Death of a Desert about the Adobe Town Wilderness Study Area. His name was Mike Venata of Square State Film. When I reached out to him, he jumped on the opportunity. And from that moment on, Mike was my partner in crime for this film and is the co-producer of the film we're premiering tonight. I also want to note that at that time, we had our mind set on a $20,000 budget for the making of this film. We launched our GoFundMe campaign in early March of 2020. Less than a week later, the world shut down. Wyoming Wilderness Association realized that we needed to put our effort on the stability of our organization, and we couldn't focus on the budget of this film. We raised just half of that budget. But Mike Venata, the literal saint that he is, did not skip a beat. He believed in this project and did not let the lack of dollar signs get in the way. I cannot thank him enough for his tireless dedication to this project, and I cannot wait for you all to see his final product with exceptional skill and craft. Now, in just a minute, we will premiere the film, I promise, and I ask the audience, no matter where you are tuning in from, to realize that this story is directly relevant to you. Whether that's because you live here near the Palisades, or because you have wildlands in your own backyard where a similar conversation is taking place, or because these lands we're talking about are public lands and they belong to all Americans, not just those that live close by. I also ask you to recall that with this ownership and access of our public lands comes a great responsibility to care and steward them, and that they have a value far greater than our individual experience within them. The Palisades, for example, is an integral piece of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, one of the last intact ecosystems on our entire planet Earth. It is home to hundreds of plants and animal species, some of which do not exist in healthy coexisting populations anywhere else in the world. It is so special to have places like this still left. It is also heartbreaking that they are so few and far between. But if we play our cards right, we may just afford places like this the right to live on. Now, before we start the film, I have one more request of all of you, and that's that you take off that metaphorical hat that you feel you already wear in this conversation. And you engage for the next 20 minutes, simply as a human being, deciding what side of history you want to be on regarding the future of our wild world. I believe that in that headspace, we are going to be able to find a solution for the Palisades and wildlands like it. Again, thank you so much for being here. Enjoy the film.
How are we going to live in this place and respect the basic land and particularly respect the critters that are already here and the wildlife?
We have to decide, about the remaining wild areas. Are we going to let them stay wild, or are we going to sort of take them over for human use?
I want us to have more trails. I want us to enjoy our public lands and not just shut it all down.
That conflict is not going to go away.
You almost can't describe it, you gotta experience it. You know it when it's there. When you step outside or you step into that situation and there's something a little bit bigger than yourself, something that has so little to do with you and society, it's like it exists on its own.
The value of wilderness still remains really important because it's a place where human interest doesn't supersede everything.
I describe wilderness as a quality of life issue. I believe it's something that everybody needs to have a connection to. If I don't connect to it at some point in time during the year, it's almost like there's a void, left in your soul.
The wilderness to me means going out and forgetting my troubles. It's going into this space that's non-judgmental, and it's equally as beautiful to everyone and everything.
When you step in it and you are fully aware and you are fully appreciative of all the intricacies and all those life forms and processes and dynamics that are going on around you that, like I said, that have little to do with you.
So in 1964, an almost unanimous vote by the U.S. Congress passed the Wilderness Act, creating a system of designated wilderness areas that are protected under law to maintain their primitive natural state. A secondary protection that was then created is the Wilderness Study Area, that is granted to lands that qualify for wilderness, but for one reason or another have not received the full protection.
The Palisades Wilderness Study Area came about because of passage of the Wyoming Wilderness Act in 1984. And with that came additional responsibilities on our part to make sure that it still could be included in the wilderness system. What we are primarily focused on is maintaining the physical characteristics of a wild country.
I'd say it's a super dynamic landscape, constantly changing. Things from rock slides, landslides, avalanches.
Big gullies that open up that just make the trail not that appealing.
You'll find debris pushed through the forest, mudslides pushed through a whole forest. It's just an extremely ever-changing landscape, and you find something new every time that you go out there.
To me, the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, it's one of the last places that we have a little remnant of what once was.
This is a corridor, a migration corridor. This is a place where large ungulates reproduce, come and they feed.
A really important part of wilderness was protecting land to kind of stem the impacts of man coming into this wild country and provide little refuges for wildlife.
If you look at not just the Palisades Wilderness Study Area, but the whole intact Palisades roadless area, it's almost 250,000 acres. So it's 250,000 acres of unroaded, wild, intact land. And they're not making any more of that.
The Palisades, located just outside Jackson Hole, kind of lives in the shadows of more famous public lands such as Grand Teton and Yellowstone National Parks and the Gros Ventre Wilderness, all that attract visitors from around the world. I feel that the Palisades has really benefited from that because it has been overlooked, and few people have actually made it their regular practice to go in there.
Jackson draws a lot of visitors because the parks are pretty spectacular, but the surrounding national forest is amazing.
The greater Yellowstone ecosystem is so unique in so many ways, but our community here in the Tetons is right in the heart of it. You know, we're not on the fringe, we're not just outside of it looking in, we are in the heart of it.
That's why people want to live here, just beyond the animals, beyond all of that. It's access to it, and it's access to nice places. We don't want to go to places that are logged out. We want to go to the places that we can go to now. And there's absolutely no question that people take that for granted.
It's almost hard to explain how good it makes me feel to be in the backcountry on my snow machine. Like, let's just talk about that. I've covered hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles in our area with a couple of my friends and never seen another person in a day.
Access to this place, to places like this, to other places in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem are going to experience more and more pressure from folks like me who want to come and recreate on these lands.
Take the mountain bike, the snowmobile, and the dirt bike community together. It's a huge community. Wilderness designation is the death sentence to all three of those recreational activities that I just mentioned.
Early in the wilderness movement, the opposition was coming from big industries such as timber harvest, mining, oil and gas. What is important to realize now in the modern fight for new wilderness, the major opposition is coming from recreationists, specifically the motorized and mechanized community. And that isn't just true here in Jackson Hole, that's occurring across the country.
Prevalent among my peers, my other mountain bikers that I know, there's a thought that mountain bikers should be allowed to ride wherever they want, do whatever they want. Some people are very entitled, and that's destructive. That mentality pits us against other users rather than makes a cohesive recreational pool of people who can protect these lands. I don't think that's a very productive mindset, and it's an extremely selfish and entitled mentality that has no place in Wyoming. I don't think it really has any place at all. I don't care where you are.
It's multiple use, which I strongly believe in, but you shouldn't be able to just go wherever you want because you like to do an activity.
tried to pull in people with interest in more mechanized uses, so we did have representatives of snowmobilers, mountain bikers, folks who like to hunt and like to get back into the backcountry on horseback, people who were interested in hiking and experiencing the backcountry without motors and without motorized access.
Put all those folks in a room, into workshops over a couple of years to hash this thing out.
So yeah, when the recommendations from the committee went to county commissioners, I don't think anyone would have guessed how effective a job some of the groups did at getting people to show up.
On Tuesday, October the 9th at 9 a.m., the Teton County Board of County Commissioners are going to hold a special session to vote on the final Wyoming Public Lands Initiative proposal.
What happened in Teton County for the WPLI was that one user group showed up en masse. They seemed to sort of dominate the conversation.
Here to speak out against the largest land grab in 34 years. It limits us to very little land to be used. There's no gain. The wilderness side certainly gains.
Clearly, some people who were there, you know, to represent their interests, which is 100% understandable, but they just had bad information about what the process was about and recommending.
This proposal is set forth would be disastrous to the local biking community. Some of the trails up on Teton Pass are crown gems. They're the most important trails that we have. They're the ones that avid bikers like to ride the most. Taking those away would be disastrous, taking away 173,000 new acres of land that we would love to bike on someday would also be disastrous.
I think Jesse and Ample did a very good job of scaring people that they were going to lose something.
I think that a lot of the people that spoke were misinformed, and so their understanding of the process and where it was going and what it would do was probably based on either word of mouth or from messaging from some of these advocacy groups representing recreation that were involved.
If passed, this proposal will result in the largest loss of mountain bike, snowmobile, and dirt bike access on our public lands in the last 34 years.
Many of the people walked away from the WPLI with this oversimplification that both sides were equally unwilling to compromise, but that simply wasn't true. For the record, as one of the pro-wilderness voices in the conversation, we were willing to, for example, permanently secure access to the entire Teton Pass trail system that so many bikers referenced in their opposition. We were also willing to leave other parts of the landscape open to motorized use. But unfortunately, an intentional manipulation of facts rallied the mountain bike and motorized community to feel that protecting the Palisades was somehow a direct assault on them and their access, which ended up shutting down the entire process.
We all love going out to fish. We all love going out to hunt. We all love to enjoy public lands. But that right hasn't been available to everybody all of the time, and we need to recognize that. Indigenous people have an intimate relationship with land. It's not some goodie bag to like draw from. The land is a living, breathing ancestor. It's a relationship with you and the land. You wouldn't sell or you wouldn't ride dirt bikes across your grandmother's back. Indigenous people have a little bit more like nuance with like how they see a riverbed or how they see like a tree or how they see nature. It's a different totally different understanding that modern land management practices do not feel comfortable actually acknowledging. But it is definitely important for land management to include Indigenous voices.
The only thing that's really mine is my hot air right now, you know, and the control I have over myself to know that I belong to something and it doesn't belong to me is it makes me smile. So there's like two types of people. I feel like I could walk outside my door and say, this is mine, and feel like the tiniest piece of dust and just like float around and feel great. Or I can walk out the door and say, this is mine, and rub my hands together and feel like it's for me, that I have complete control. And
at what point do you deny yourself for the sake of the greater, you know? Whether that means just not eating all that food that you want to eat because you're hungry, or whether that means I'm just not going to go biking there.
This is something that is more important than just me. There's a need for that kind of place where kids can go walk and see what it was like before we were here.
You know, wilderness character, you know, you should have that quietness. Everything should slow down. You know, it's not a race.
Wild places have a greater value than human experience because they're homes to animals and other plants. And it's not just us, it's their home too.
I mean, my personal sentiment towards wilderness is, you know, I'm willing to pay to know it exists because it's part of the whole ecosystem services, it's part of the web of life. It provides value to me beyond just dollars and cents.
The outdoors is very predictable, I believe. I think buffalo are predictable. I think bears and wolves are predictable. We know what they're going to do, but we continue to think that what we do isn't wild, isn't unpredictable. We're the worst. We are wild. We are out of control. But the rest of it is just as it should be.
Some days are long.
The Palisades is definitely qualifies for wilderness and definitely deserves to be designated. The interesting thing about the Palisades is it's maintained its characteristics in the face of all this recreational and usage pressure. And it kind of is a test case, I guess, nationally, where you've got an area that is deserving of wilderness, but it's loved to death by the people. I hope the Palisades wins, but we'll see.
I feel like there is still a solution within reach for this landscape. The recreationists in this story are not the antagonists. I am a recreationist. We have this opportunity, and I feel an obligation to zoom out and consider the entire Palisades area as a whole.
It's not going to be easy. It hasn't been easy. It's not going to be pretty. It's going to be ugly at times, but this is the time. The people are here, the energy is here, and there's no better time than right now.
Ultimately, I'm hopeful that we'll have some further protection for these areas so that they're around for us in their near natural state for as long as I'll be around, as long as my daughter will be around.
I want to be on the right side of history, I want to be on the right side of history. I know we could access that, yet to look back on our generation or our community right here in Jackson Hole and say, this is what we did, I hope we can say we're proud of it. I hope my kids can say I'm proud of it. So there's a certain level of human need out there, and there's a level of human want, and we can separate our wants from our needs a little bit. And I think in this case, yeah, I hope we can be proud of our decisions. So yeah, I'm pro-wilderness.
if you long to see the stars again, kicking in the hunter's snare. Be happy, not loving. Love had never set you free. And don't forget that the lost shall be redeemed somehow, and never grow too old to dream.
All right, so there you have it, the premiere of the Palisades Project film. And although many people have given congratulations today for the completion of the film and the premiere, it's quite obvious that we still have a lot of work ahead of us. And I'm excited to dive in, and I feel very grateful because several of the folks you just heard from in the film are joining us for a live panel discussion tonight, and I want to introduce those folks to you. So to start us off, we have Josh Metton here, who is a hunter, a naturalist, and a dedicated wildlife advocate. We have Tony Ferlisi, who served as the executive director of Mountain Bike the Tetons for the past 3 years and has recently taken a new role as the Teton Regional Director at Legacy Works. Linda Merigliano, who has served as a public servant and land manager in this area for decades, and joins as the Wilderness and Program Manager for the Bridger Teton National Forest. And Dan Smitherman, who after serving 23 years, 2 months, and 3 days in the Marine Corps, moved to Wyoming and ran an outfitting business from his home in Bondurant, and now serves as the Wyoming State Director for the Wilderness Society. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. I really appreciate it. We had a 5th panelist, Taylor Stagner, who you all saw in the film, who planned to be zooming in from Lander. Unfortunately, she's unable to make it, but we still wanted to make sure her voice was included in the conversation. And so we wanted to share a short compilation from the interview she did earlier this year.
The land is a living, breathing ancestor. It's a relationship with you and the land. You wouldn't sell or you wouldn't ride dirt bikes across your grandmother's back. And that brings into question the entire idea of what is public land other than land we took from Native Americans. My name is Taylor Stagner. I am a descendant of the Eastern Shoshone tribe and a descendant of the Cheyenne Arapaho tribe in Oklahoma. I'm also an Indigenous reporter for Wyoming Public Radio in Laramie. I dedicated pretty much my whole life to getting people to understand that there needs to be Indigenous voices at the table at every step of the way. Everything that we decide on as a state, on the federal level, in our towns, just needs an Indigenous understanding injected into it because it's been gone for so long. Anytime that you report on Indigenous issues, there's always 5 or 6 different entities claiming some sort of right to have a seat at the table. Any federal institution, any state institution needs to really look hard of how they are structuring their how they do business every day, because if you look around and nobody's thinking about Indigenous people or people of color, then there's probably a good chance that you're just perpetuating racist policy that doesn't affect white people, and so it seems to not exist. if we don't actually start including Indigenous people within these paradigms of like public land stewardship, it's always going to make me very uncomfortable to see just anybody driving around a snowmobile or doing whatever they want. Maybe that place was sacred to a particular tribe. You don't know because you didn't ask.
She is such a rock star. We so wish she was here. Yeah, but we will include her in lots of conversations that the Wyoming Wilderness Association facilitates moving forward for sure. But without further ado, let's dive in with the panelists we do have present. And I'm going to begin just by giving a brief overview for how the panel is going to work. So the first half of the panel is going to be one curated question that has been drafted with each of the panel members. And we'll go through and they'll each have the opportunity to answer that question. And then the second half of the time will be spent answering questions that all of you in our virtual audience have. So if you look to the bottom of the screen, we're bringing up a banner, and in that banner there is a number. So just text whatever questions you have for our panel to this number, and if you have a specific panelist in mind, indicate that in your text, and it'll come through to my phone, and we will ask them as they come through. So you can text in your questions anytime starting now, but we'll wait till the second half of the panel to dive into those questions. So without further ado, let's start with Josh. Josh, from your understanding as a hunter and a naturalist, how does the 250,000 acre Greater Palisades landscape compare to other areas already designated as wilderness, as far as the natural topography and wildlife habitat are concerned?
Yeah, I think, excuse me, when you look at wilderness across and protected landscapes across the United States, the places that we protected first were these rock and ice, big high elevation areas, not even necessarily the best wildlife habitat. What we ended up with as preserved landscapes is what we associate with being wild landscapes with wildlife on them. But we've lost a lot of the best habitat that we used to have. I think one thing that's so interesting about the Palisades is it actually has these, especially compared to some of these other wilderness areas in Wyoming, it's a little bit lower elevation terrain. It has this ruggedness and great wildlife habitat to it. I mean, all of the drainages are full of beaver ponds and beaver meadows, and then you've got these big open wildflower meadows, and you go from way down in elevation from like the riparian areas up into alpine, all in one small area. I think one of my kind of favorite examples of this is when we were out filming this project, the first night, the filmmaker Mike and I went up this north-facing slope, and it was very thick mountain ash, and then we ended up crossing over into a drainage, dropping down into this very moist, wet drainage, and ended up on a wolf rendezvous site. Had 2 wolves come into about 50 yards, and then followed that marshy area all the way back down to the creek, and then back to camp in the middle, in the darkness. And just having that diversity of habitat, whether it's forested areas, open meadows, riparian areas, and even high alpine, is what allows the Palisades to have robust herds of elk, awesome mule deer hunting. There's mountain goats in there. There historically were bighorn sheep. You've got wolves, black bears. It's increasingly there could be grizzly bears coming back into that area, and then all sorts of diverse bird species as well. So it's a really robust and diverse wild place.
Thank you so much, Josh. It sure is. I remember that trip so fondly, and remember that story of the wolves, and that blew my mind, just to put into context how wild it is. Tony, our next question is for you, and the conversation around recreation has evolved as the technologies we use to recreate have evolved. So as things continue to become faster, lighter, and easier to use, how do you reckon with the question of whether every use has to be able to go everywhere?
Sure. That's a really good question, Peggy. And
Thanks again for having me. It was really a pleasure to be a part of this project.
Thank you, Tony.
With regard to technology, we tend to think in terms of, let's talk about the bicycle, let's talk about mountain bikes. And mountain bike technology is evolving at a pretty rapid pace. And what that allows for folks to do is to get places a little bit easier. We've got lighter bikes, they're more comfortable to ride. They make the ride a whole lot more fun. But one thing that I think it's important to consider is information technology as well. And so when we think of landscapes like the Palisades, one of the big pieces is, well, more folks, more mountain bikers like myself are able to access some of these remote locations because we have access to the information. Online mapping tools. In the past, guidebook authors and map makers had kind of held the keys to what information we had to be able to access a certain place. Nowadays, we're crowdsourcing that information. We've got online mapping resources like Trailforks and MTB Project. We've got folks using Strava. I utilize all of these technologies. I think what we need to keep in mind, especially as a recreation user group, is that there is inherent responsibility that we all share in when we do share that information. That information be accurate, and that we're considering that not all of this information might even be correct or might even be right. And so that is one piece that has led us to kind of branch out into an exploratory mode, which is great, but it's something to be considered. How are we sharing information about these places with our recreation user groups moving forward? And it's definitely something that should be a part of the conversation, not just the equipment that we're using to get there.
Thank you, Tony. Do you want to touch on that last part of the question of, as we kind of decide how that evolution in technology influences our management of a landscape?
Sure. I think that we're able to actually utilize a lot of this technology for the benefit of coming up with a solution to what could be considered a pretty serious problem that we might be embarking upon here with the Palisades. We're able to collect data. We're able to tell when mountain bikers, for example, are utilizing certain trails, when early in the season, when the first riders are going in, when that use is concentrated the most. And then we're able to work, across the spectrum with whether it be federal agencies, whether it be other NGOs, to sort of set up some management prescriptions that would take care of protecting certain values that we do protect. We've just got that data at hand. We're ready to put that into play as part of this conversation.
Awesome. I appreciate how some of the technology will actually help inform our management moving forward and not just be a burden to it. So thank you for that insight, Tony. I appreciate it. Sure. Dan, you're up next, and the question is a term that comes up a lot in conversations about wilderness conservation and recreation, at least regarding the Palisades, which is the conversation on the table tonight, is this term multiple use. And I was wondering if you could explain a little bit, where does that term multiple use come from? What does it mean? And in your opinion, is wilderness designation a multiple use?
Thanks, Peggy. Like Tony, I appreciated the opportunity to participate in the film. It was a great experience with a lot of great people on a really great landscape. It's interesting when you talk about multiple use. Probably the two major misperceptions about wilderness is one, that every action on every acre, which means that whatever multiple uses are there, they should be able to be performed regardless of what the landscape or the terrain or the other stuff was. And the second thing is that wilderness designation in itself is inherently not multiple use. The organic legislation that answers those questions is the Multiple Use Sustained Yield Act passed in 1960. It was originally specifically for the Forest Service, and it replaced or updated the Organic Administration Act, which was passed in 1897. But that document, or that law, specifically states that the administration and establishment of wilderness is consistent with multiple use sustained yield. And secondly, the definition of multiple use in the Act says that the uses that are authorized should be maintained or combined in a method that best meets the interest of the American people and best meets the interest of the land. So it says in order for you to sustain the output from this land, you have to look at what that land can support and make that mix as applicable to that as you can. The second part of your question is really interesting because nowhere in the Wilderness Act does it talk about multiple use. So you have to do a little bit of inferring. So if you assume that the Multiple Use Act says the administration, that gives the Forest Service the authority to administer designated wilderness. But what's interesting to me is if you look at the uses that were specifically called out in the Multiple Use Act, timber, grazing, outdoor recreation, fish and wildlife, etc. The only use that was specifically mentioned in the MUSE Act that is not allowed in designated wilderness is timber harvest. And then if you look at the Act of designating wilderness, which is the organic act that controls what can be happen and what can be done in wilderness, there's multiple activities. I mean, you can graze cows, you can outdoor recreate, hunt, fish. If you have pre-existing rights for water reservoirs to graze cattle or a mineral claim, those are allowed as pre-existing conditions. So there's a wide multitude of things you can do in wilderness. So the two together to me make it pretty clear that the designation of wilderness, the administration of wilderness is consistent with the multiple use and in fact is multiple use.
Very interesting. I appreciate that history lesson and context, Dan. Thank you very much. Linda, last but certainly not least, I'm really excited to hear from you on this question, which is, as a career public servant, land manager, what barriers do you see to our community that we need to confront as we seek solutions for the Palisades, and what opportunities do you think might exist to build on areas of agreement and move this conversation forward?
All right. Well, again, thank you to everyone who's here on the panel. Is we really, really appreciate the effort that Peggy went to try to use this film as a way to bring in a multitude of voices and things. That's critical to how we move forward with any kind of solution or moving forward. I really want to reiterate one point that Peggy made during the film and a number of the other voices that were in the film made, is that this is a really, really hard problem, an issue to try to resolve. It is not the old debates that that we had in the 60s and into the 80s, where it really was about different kinds of commodity uses versus what we wanted to try to do to protect the land and things. When we're talking about a debate that is fundamentally about how we value a place, that is a very, very much harder conversation to have. And so I just want to acknowledge that that is part of what we need to accept as a community, is that we all want to work together. We all love this place. We all want to try to protect the inherent values of the place, but we have different ways that we want to access and enjoy a place. And that's a little harder solution to find. And I think that, as was pointed out in the film, is we've got to really come to grips with it is not all or nothing thinking. It's not, we can't just look at it as based on a fear of potential loss. We've got to be willing to approach this issue with a sense that we are willing to trust one another and put our cards on the table and see where we can find common ground and build on that. And that's not easy especially if you're fearing that you're going to lose access. None of us want to not be able to do what we love and things. And so I think that that's a tough one. I also think that for any of these kinds of land designation kinds of issues is the Palisades is an incredibly, it's a large landscape. It's really intact when you're looking at both the Wyoming and the Idaho portion. But it also exists within this context of a much larger ecosystem. And so the question then becomes, if we don't want certain uses in this place, where do we want them? And we're starting to get to the place where between our interest in really protecting wildlife migration corridors and a number of other values is there. It's really hard to say where do we want this use to occur that isn't really going to have, every use has some impact. And so, where is that alternative? And so as far as opportunities, is we really think that at some point, the Bridger-Teton National Forest will be undergoing a forest plan revision. As part of that revision, the Forest Service does need to make a recommendation about the future, a recommendation for the future of the Palisades. And so that's going to be a very, very public process with a lot of the same issues coming back. There also is an opportunity, even without congressional action, which is ultimately what it's going to take to resolve the issue, is there probably is an opportunity for people to work together to come up with what does a stewardship plan look like for this area in the interim, and make that be part of the forest plan. Given our common interest in keeping this area really wild, keeping it undeveloped, keeping it low use, and respecting the different kinds of uses. Can we use some kind of a zoning scheme, or how much we want it to develop? As was noted in the film, this is a pretty rugged landscape, and the trails are up really steep ravines, and they're not easy to maintain. And so there's some inherent qualities of the land that make it access a little bit difficult. And so how can we use that to really make sure that we protect what we love about this place going forward in a management scheme? So that, I think there's some opportunities that exist that could build on some of our common areas of agreement.
I am hopeful for the solution, and I am just looking down at my phone, and we have about 35 questions already that have come through, which is awesome, because my biggest fear was that I would be left hanging. So thank you all for engaging and sending in your questions. This is awesome. And before we even dive in, I just want to say, tonight is the beginning of a conversation. This film was designed to be a catalyst for conversation, and there's no way we're going to hit them all, but let's dive in. The first question is pretty low-hanging, and that's if this includes Idaho land. And I'll just kind of check that off, is that the Palisades Wilderness Study Area was designated through the Wyoming Wilderness Act, but there's a whole other half of the greater roadless intact wild landscape that exists within Idaho as well. So yes, this is a Wyoming and Idaho issue. This question came through: as a member of the emergency service group, I have seen a great increase in the number of rescues needed in areas where we seldom went. Has anyone thought about the strain put on more agencies' time and money for equipment? And I imagine this means as increased use goes into these landscapes. Does anyone want to take a quick whack at that question?
I could try. I think that one of the things that we have to realize is that even there's a lot of energy around what should we designate these lands as, but that's only the start of it. There is a huge amount of work to try to take care of a place once an area is designated. And that's across the entire public land spaces, is with increasing use and everything, there is more and more management responsibilities. And as Tony mentioned, is what we are seeing right now, especially after 2020, is that people love outdoor spaces, and they're coming in increasing numbers. And we have got to collectively come together and figure out how we're going to really reach out to people and get them the correct information so they know how to use these areas safely. They have access to the resources for how to be prepared, what they need to know before they go, and then what does responsibility look like once they get there. And that's a huge part of what we're all, I think, collectively trying to realize. How do we use some of the new apps and everything to get information to people before they arrive?
Thank you, Linda. The next question that I'm going to pitch to Tony is, have there been any efforts to use Strava in the way that you mentioned in order to inform management?
Yeah, that's a great question, and yes, there have been, and there currently is some movement happening with that. There are some ways with Strava that you're able to access data that typical Strava users aren't necessarily capable of accessing. And there are some folks who have been working with some local recreation advocates here, with the Forest Service, and then with Strava, particularly to source some of this data. And this data, it's not, who is this person and when are they recreating on this place? Yeah. It's more shows in terms of intensity of use. And so you're able to look at a map essentially over an enormous time scale, going from 24 hours to multiple years, and you're able to identify trends. And so what that has enabled communities like the mountain bike community to do is to be able to come to the table with the Forest Service, with Wyoming Game and Fish, et cetera, and have discussions and outline on a map, okay, here are the areas of more intense use during this time of year. Let's see where that overlaps with maybe some critical wildlife areas. And when we're able to identify those places, collectively get some folks in the room that know what they're talking about, we're able to kind of narrow things down and start to come up with some potential solutions to how we might manage for that specific area. So there is some real utility in that tool. It's developing currently, but it's actually pretty exciting to see where this is going.
Great.
So, yep. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Tony. The next question I'm going to throw to Dan, which is about the 30 by 30 initiative by the Biden administration and how you see the Palisades conversation fitting into that initiative by our new administration.
Thanks, Peggy. The 30 by 30 initiative, as everyone's aware of, is gathering quite a bit of positive and negative pressures and media attention right now. But on its face value, 30 by 30 is not about any one particular designation or any particular one use. Its primary purpose is to address the species extinction crisis and climate change. And all types of landscapes fit into that category. So you're looking at private lands, you're looking at refuges, you're looking at national parks, et cetera. Palisades, I think, fits in basically for what Linda said. You got to remember that even though the Palisades area is about 250,000 acres, it's the centerpiece of a huge landscape that basically represents the High Divide in Montana, down through Salmon, Idaho, to Yellowstone Park, all the way to Kemmerer, and to the Northern Red Desert. And it's a part of that, and it's a part that should be protected as part of 3030. And one of the things that 3030 is going to do, or have to do at some point in time, is to look at areas where protections exist that are part of a priority landscape and then fill in those gaps. And that's the type of landscape that you would have with Palisades.
Thank you, Dan. There's a question here with a statistic that only 18% of Teton County is open to motorized use. So what is the point to close down any more of that, considering the kind of imbalance, as this person is talking about, in access? And Josh, since you haven't answered a question,
Sure.
and I know as a recreationist, do you want to take a whack at that? I know Dan raised his hand also, but maybe you can kick us off.
Yeah, I think to like expand on what Dan was just saying about the kind of the 30-30 initiative, like, I mean, we're here in Jackson, being just north of the Palisades Wilderness Study Area. This northwest corner of Wyoming is a core part of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. And across the United States, most of the wild country that we once had is gone, and we'll probably never get it back. But we still have a little taste of that here, here in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, and the Palisades is part of that. As Dan was mentioning, it's connecting Grand Teton and Yellowstone all the way down along the Wyoming range into the Red Desert. So if we look at Teton County alone, I mean, most of Teton County is in Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Park. These are protected landscapes. Then if you zoom in on Teton County alone, you see that, oh, there's not motorized use, but the state of Wyoming is crisscrossed with motorized use, and we just have so little of that left, and it just doesn't make sense to me to like make that kind of an argument when you zoom out and look at the massive landscapes that have been forever lost due to human development.
Thanks, Josh. Dan, do you have something to add?
Well, I just wanted to say that I think Josh hit it slightly there. It's a misrepresentation. It's out of context. If you look at the National Forest System nationally, over 87% of the National Forest lands is open to snowmobiling and mechanized motorized recreation. We just happen to live in a place where we have 3 premier national forests in the CT, the BT, and the Shoshone, 2 world-renowned national parks in Yellowstone and Grand Teton, all in one little place. It doesn't happen very often anywhere else. And you make a choice to live here because of these attributes, knowing that you're going to be restricted to protect them. So I think the way that is stated is really a misrepresentation. Thank
you, Dan. There's a question about what your commitment is to this solution as a panel. And I'm going to tweak the question just a little bit to go to the pledge. And I just thought maybe we could wrap up this conversation. And as I said, this is just the beginning of a conversation. So I apologize that not everyone's questions could get answered. But maybe just go down the line and explain if you sign the pledge to be part of a solution for the Palisades. And Linda, do you want to kick us off?
Okay. Well, certainly, as land managers, we would love to see a solution for the Palisades. We would love to have people come together and work in good faith to find a solution and not have this landscape be forever a battleground. That said, as a public servant, we are here to basically facilitate and listen and try to make sure that all the voices are heard as we try to come up with what a recommendation might be for the future, but we will remain neutral during that conversation.
Thank you, Linda. Dan?
As far as the Palisades Pledge is concerned, certainly I'll sign the pledge. I was fortunate enough to go to the Palisades 12 months after it was designated in 1985, and have spent a lot of time there. And it was one of my first public land experiences in Wyoming, so it's a special place to me. And I might mention my organization, the Wilderness Society, has actually moved kind of away from all wilderness because of 30 by 30 and other things, to look at ways that we can protect values of a landscape
without calling it a name. So this type of opportunity fits right in with what we're hoping to do in the future.
Thank you, Dan. Tony?
Sure, yeah, I personally am committed to finding solution for the Palisades, and will of course sign the pledge. I think that, as a recreationist, as a mountain biker, I've had a chance to explore that landscape and hunted elk in that landscape and caught fish in that landscape. And I think that we need to look at ourselves as each of us as a part of that landscape as well, whatever that is, the use or interest, etc. And that's what's going to lead us to a solution to this problem, is to work collaboratively and work across sectors. When we talk about values of a landscape, it makes things so much more difficult, as Linda had expressed before. But we're positioned now at a really interesting time. I think we have the opportunity now to bring members of this community together. We've learned from some really tough experiences in the past, and we're ready to bring those lessons to bear here. We've got an amazing suite of tools, I think, that we can take advantage of in order to make sure that this place retains its value for wildlife, for the folks who like to use it, no matter what your mode of use looks like, and for folks that are going to be here and appreciating this place long after all of us are gone, long after this place and everything around it has moved on. And so I'm looking forward to engaging in that process with all the folks that chimed in with questions tonight. I mean, your voices are critical to this. So yeah, let's do it.
Thanks, Tony. And Josh?
Yeah, so having the opportunity to get to go into the Palisades with you and Dan and Mike was really special and important to me, because for me, like the Palisades, and for many of the people that are for all the people that are interested in this this landscape, it's it's my place. I had a friend once ask me, like, from a hunting perspective, like, what is your place? Do you have your spot? And I'm like, yeah, I know exactly where that spot is. And it's in the Palisades. It's my spot. I've had an opportunity to get to explore many different landscapes across the U.S. and across the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, and the Palisades is certainly my place. And I think when we're thinking about when we're signing the pledge and to come up with a good future for the Palisades, we need to kind of try and look beyond our own reasons for loving this landscape and think about the Palisades in the bigger picture. Like, what is the best thing for the Palisades? What is the best thing for the greater Yellowstone ecosystem? What is the best thing for the other organisms that thrive in that landscape? And part of that means, as humans, we need to recognize that might mean that we are accepting limits on whatever our personal interest is in the Palisades.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for being here and offering your perspective. Linda, of course, I respect the neutral ground you have to remain in, and the rest of you, thank you so much for your commitment to joining Wyoming Wilderness Association in this solution, in this pledge to the solution. This conversation is just getting started. I want to thank everyone who showed up tonight, who asked questions, who watched the film, and whose wheels are turning on what the path forward is. I hope you all enjoyed the show. I hope you considered a new perspective, and I hope you have become inspired to get involved. So if you haven't already, consider going to palisadesproject.org and signing our pledge. Conveniently, that link is listed at the bottom of the screen right now. It's also available on the website that you use to access this live stream tonight, so you can click on it and find it there. And what does it mean to sign the pledge? First of all, you're making a commitment to yourself that you're going to approach this conversation with an open mind and consider the intrinsic value of the Palisades as we approach conversations around how to manage it moving forward. You'll also be added to a mailing list that we, Wyoming Wilderness Association, will use to reach out to you, and opportunities to get involved in future conversations like this one come on the table. And so I encourage you, sign the pledge, get involved with the solution for the Palisades. Recently, a new acquaintance of mine shared a personal letter they received from the grandmother of conservation and one of my personal heroes, Marty Murray. And the final line of that letter said, "It's going to take all of us." And I truly believe it is going to take all of us. So please join the effort, palisadesproject.org, and make the pledge to be a part of the solution. I want to remind you that the Palisades Project film is a production of the Wyoming Wilderness Association, which is a statewide organization working to protect Wyoming public wild lands. And the film was created in partnership with the one and only Mike Venata of Square State Film. Thank you so much, Mike, for your hard work on this project. To close, I want to give another huge thank you to all of those who agreed to be involved in the film. This story would not have been possible without your voice, so thank you so much for a willingness to be involved. And also a huge thank you to all those who contributed financially, musically, morally, and beyond, which most certainly includes everyone on the panel. Josh, Tony, Dan, Linda, thank you again for being here. Last but certainly not least, I want to say thank you to the Center for the Arts for hosting the premiere through the incredible community resource that they have invested in, which allows events like this one to still happen and still feel meaningful despite the lingering limitations of the pandemic. Thank you so much to the Center for the Arts. With that, keep it wild, everybody, and don't forget, sign the pledge, spread the word, and let's find a solution to keep the Palisades protected. Thank you all so much.